This is Jambo Radio.
Yes. Hello, and welcome to the Science Show with Dr Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland, broadcasting from the city of Glasgow. Of course, as you know, as usual, we explore science, technology, and the impact that these developments have on our everyday lives. And that's why today the topic for this show will be very, very interesting indeed. It is veterinary epidemiology. So what's that all about? Why should we care about it? What impact does it have on the society? And what exciting findings and research activities are taking place in this field of research and in this field of science and technology here in Scotland and here in Glasgow in particular? These are questions that we'll be looking at and answering on today's show. So the question of the week is, what are the societal impacts of veterinary epidemiology? And of course, as usual, we have an expert in the studio with us to help us shed light on this topic. Well, I'm your host, Dr Adetunmise. I'm a lecturer in optics at the University of Glasgow, and this is the Science Show with Dr Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland. As mentioned earlier, we're broadcasting live from Glasgow, and don't forget you can listen to us on DAB, that is on digital radio, whether you're in the car, whether you're at home, whether you're just chilling out in the garden. If you have a digital radio, you can catch this show. You can also listen and watch us live on jamboradio.co.uk. And of course, please do follow us on our social media platforms, including YouTube and Instagram. So let's get into today's show then. First, we'll be looking at some highlights of what we're going to be enjoying in today's show. So first of all, we'll have the science news highlights, and then we'll have a chat with our guest in the studio. We'll be getting to know who they are, what they've been working on, what their track record has been, and so on and so forth. And then after that, we'll be having a discussion on today's topic. We'll be looking at some new interesting highlights on veterinary science and epidemiology. And of course, then we'll have the part 2 of the interview, in which we'll delve into the work of our scientists in the studio. And then we'll be, of course, having the lines open, so you'll be able to chip in on the discussion. Very good. And at the end, we'll be enjoying some science jokes, and we'll be enjoying some good music as well. You know, as we like to do on this show, we listen to science, we talk about science and technology, but we also always like to spice things up with music. Great. So before we get into our science news highlights, let's have a quick introduction of our guest, the guest we have in the studio with us today, our expert. And he is none other than Dr. Ekwem. Dr. Ekwem, you are welcome to the studio today and welcome to the Science Show. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. It's really, really nice to have you with us. So you're a research associate, and your area of research is infectious disease ecology. Isn't that the case?
That is true.
Great. And you're from the School of Biodiversity, One Health and Veterinary Medicine at the University of Glasgow.
Correct.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about some of the work that you've done, some of the exciting research that you're doing here in Glasgow and also in Africa. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, that's it.
Great. Very, very good. So it's really nice. We'll come back to you later in the show. It's really nice to have you with us.
Okay.
So let's get into our science news headlines then, our science news highlights. So we have a couple of headlines for today, and these headlines, not only are they recent, they're also, something to do with the topic for today. So the first one, this one is quite interesting. It's from the BBC. It says, kitten found with no sex organs in veterinary first in Tyneside. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? It's basically a kitten with no male organs, no female sex organs, just completely nothing. Well, let's go into it. It says a homeless kitten is the first to be seen by vets at an animal charity that is neither male nor female. So it says a tabby and white kitten was found with no internal or external sex organs after they were examined at a cats protection center in Gateshead, that's in England. Animal officers said that there was no term for the cat's condition, but because it was so rare, but it added it had been exciting to discover Hope's special status. Of course, Hope is the name of the kitten. The charity added the 15-week-old pet was healthy and ready to be rehomed. Now, Cat Protection Senior Field Veterinary Officer Fiona Brockbank said it appeared to be a case of agenesis, the failure of an organ to develop, which she and her colleagues had never seen before. So this is quite interesting in the field of science. So you have an animal here with no, as you can see on the screen, if you're watching live or if you're watching the video. So this kitten basically has no male sex organs, no female sex organs, no ovaries or anything inside or outside the body of the animal. And that's really, really interesting, a first, as it says in the report here. So here they said that discovering Hope's special status has been an exciting time, as none of us has seen this before or are likely to again. So yeah, I thought it tied in really well with the fact that today we're looking at diseases and epidemiology in animals, in livestock. Anyway, so that's there on the BBC. You can read more on that story on the BBC News website. The next story, climate change, dimming Earth, sex-changing reptiles, and other odd side effects. So yeah, it's not planned. There seems to be a theme about sex change and things like that in today's show, but it's really not planned. It's just what's out there on the news. So the first aspect, sex-changing reptiles, this being highlighted as one of the effects of climate change, which is quite interesting if you ask me. It says, while we might be causing global warming, we're not the only ones experiencing it. Some creatures are affected in truly surprising ways. In some reptiles, the sex of offspring is partly determined by the temperature at which the eggs are incubated. Genetically male central bearded dragons, a species of lizard found in Australia, will actually change from male to female when they are incubated over a certain temperature. So scientists are concerned that males could become increasingly rare as the world warms, putting the species at risk of extinction. In the ocean, rising levels of the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide could be also causing fish to lose their sense of smell. So just a couple of highlights on the effects that climate change, in particular warming of the earth, is having on animal life. So as you can see there, that's the species of lizard. That lizard changes its sex to suit the weather, as it says on the report there on New Scientist. But really, it's talking about the egg and the sex of the offspring of the species. Anyway, interesting. The next item under this subheading is dimming Earth shine. So there it says climate change could be dimming the planet's shine. According to scientists at the Big Bear Solar Observatory in New Jersey, it says by measuring the sunlight reflected from Earth to the dark part of the moon at night, scientists measured what they call Earth shine or albedo, basically Earth's reflectiveness. So as we know, when the moon shines, that's because the moon is reflecting light from the sun, and that reflects back to us on Earth. And you can see that as a very bright moon, if you like. But in the case of the Earth, if you were standing on the moon, you would see something similar. So the Earth also has a shine, if you like. It's called Earth shine in this report. So it says that the studies suggested that the amount of low cloud cover over the eastern Pacific Ocean is reducing due to the warming ocean temperatures. Since these clouds act like a mirror, so they're very reflective of the light from the sun, they reflect the light from the sun back into space and into areas, for example, to the moon, according to these scientists, we might actually be taking the shine off our little blue dot. So the warming temperatures reduces these kinds of cloud cover, and reduces the reflectivity or the albedo of the Earth. So that's quite an interesting thing. Very recent news entry there again from the BBC. Now, also on the news highlights today, UK zoonotic research site left to deteriorate, according to MPs. Now, zoonotic, that terminology is going to be explained to us by our expert in the studio today, hopefully. But this report says the UK's main facility for dealing with viruses that jump from animals to humans has been left to deteriorate to an alarming extent, according to MPs. The Public Affairs Committee cited inadequate management and underinvestment at the site in Weybridge. It said that the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or DEFRA, had comprehensively failed in its historical management of the centre. DEFRA said work was already underway to upgrade the laboratories. The centre is operated by the government's Animal and Plant Health Agency, APHA or AFA. It is central to the UK's ability to control the outbreak of animal diseases and detect any emerging pathogens. Of course, some of the deadliest viruses on Earth have been diseases that cross between species. So, for example, from animals to humans. And these include things like, COVID-19, SARS, or Ebola. So it's really shocking, this report, isn't it? I said that the risk to the UK of a zoonotic disease was real, and the consequences can be devastating, as we are well aware. Again, on the report, it just mentions that the UK and the EU are currently in the grip of a record avian flu outbreak that has killed 48 million birds. So this is something that's ongoing. Maybe, it's not so much on our minds because it's not really directly affecting us, or maybe it is, as we'll discuss in the show. But, that's something that's really, really important and has a huge societal impact as well. If we just put that picture up again, so just to explain there. So that's showing a ranger at the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust Reserve as he removes the carcasses of 2 dead swans who were thought to be infected with avian flu. So just, highlighting some of the work going on at these centers there. So anyway, we'll get more light shed on that for us as we get into our discussion later on in the show. So let's now get into our interview. So we're going to get to know Dr. Ekwem a little bit better. So as we introduced earlier, he's the expert who's going to be telling us more about epidemiology in livestock. And again, we welcome you, Dr. Ekwem. And we'd just like to get to know you. We'd like to know if you'd like to share with us some aspects of your background, for example, your family life, where you grew up, and how come you're here in Glasgow doing science.
Yes. Right. Thank you very much, Dada. So basically, I am Nigerian. I had my undergraduate training in the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and so I trained as a vet. And after graduation, I think I've always wanted to measure into those diseases that actually transmit from animals to humans, which you've mentioned already, which is zoonosis, and that inspired me to come to Dundee to study epidemiology and public health, because basically that's what it involves. So I was in Dundee for about 2 years and had my master's there at the University of Dundee, and then moved over to Glasgow to had another master's on still zoonosis, and then the PhD kind of diverse a little bit to more veterinary epidemiology, which of course we'll be talking about today. So they kind of correlated, they kind of a lot of similarities between zoonoses, veterinary epidemiology, human epidemiology, which is basically what I did in Dundee. So I'll kind of, in the course of our chat, kind of explain to you the slight differences in how they all interact with each other. So, but for the past 4 or 5 years now, I've been doing a lot of veterinary epidemiology stuff, and the focus has been on East Africa. So I do travel a lot to Tanzania, Kenya, and we have a lot of network and collaborations with like Nelson Mandela African Institution of Science and Technology in Tanzania, and also the International Livestock Research Institute, ILRI in Kenya. So there's been a lot of collaborative research, between this institution and the University of Glasgow, which I'm really involved in. So basically that's it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That's really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing that with us. So your education before the University of Nigeria, was that also in Nsukka or in the surrounding areas? What kind of motivated you to pursue the undergraduate course that you did?
Yeah, I think it's basically my family. So my father is actually a cocoa plantation owner.
I see.
So he that's plants, of course, is completely different from the veterinary stuff. But he was thinking about starting a range, like having a cattle range, for example.
Excellent.
And he thought maybe if he's going to have that kind of establishment, then he would like to have a son that will eventually manage it in the long term. And then he inspired me not to continue with the cocoa side of things, but to be thinking about the livestock aspect,
I see.
which kind of inspired me to study veterinary medicine. And well, eventually he didn't start that business eventually, but he realized that he just wanted to continue with his cocoa stuff. But then I was already in love with the veterinary side of things, and I could see I could really make an impact, by being a vet, so that was the origin, but eventually ended up being my own desire as well, even though I was inspired by him because of the economic aspect he was thinking about. But it ended up very okay for me as well. That's why I'm here in Glasgow. Yeah.
That's great. Really, really interesting. So many different paths into STEM, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
That's great. So I take it you enjoyed agric science a lot then, maybe in secondary school and, primary school, those aspects of science?
Yeah, actually, the veterinary training is a bit different from the agricultural side. But, you don't know that until you are into it. So the veterinary science is medicine. The only difference is that we study medicine on animals, while the doctors or the human doctors study medicine on humans. But ours is even more complicated because we have so many species.
Exactly.
We have like the comparative. So basically, when you study, say, anatomy, for example, there's human anatomy, there is veterinary anatomy. But in human anatomy, you only have one species, which is human, Homo sapiens, right? But in the veterinary anatomy, you've got the cats, the dogs, the cattle, and even the lizards. So you have to study all these anatomies, and there is a comparative anatomy. I remember one time when I was in third year in my veterinary school, and one of the vival, because we have vival, in every year basically.
Yeah.
So I was being asked the expert then was a professor in anatomy, veterinary anatomy. He presented the bone of a sheep and that of a goat, and then he asked me, "So, Divine, can you tell me the difference between, like a bone of a cat and that of a sheep and a goat?" So that's a bit tricky. But there are some very little minute things that differentiate both. So the study is so intensive.
Yeah.
So when you come out, you just feel so complete that you can do so many things, and that's why I could go into the Human Epidemiology School in Dundee, and I could do well, after 2 years, to have the master's there and still continue with the veterinary stuff. We could combine. So when you be a vet, you're so educated that you're so exposed to so many things. Yeah. And I think it's quite an interesting bit, actually. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So if any of our listeners is, thinking about, getting into veterinary medicine, well, you've heard it from Dr. Ekwem there. So that's fantastic. So we'll get more into, what it's like, or like what you actually do now in your research, or what you did in your PhD and so on later in the show. But now we're going to have a music break, and we're going to listen to a song, Wet Arm by Tana Musica. So this song is actually interesting. It was inspired by the pandemic, and I'll let you listen to it and see what you think. So Wet Arm by Tana Musica. We'll be right back.
how you dey? My people, how you dey? Keep it safe. My people, keep it safe. First wet your hand with the water. Then apply the soap all over. Scrub all your palm oil wella. Rub over every finger, yeah. Under your nails, make you wash 'em. Front of your hands, make you scrub 'em. Back of your hands, make you rub 'em. Then you rinse 'em again. Wetty. Soapy. Scrub it. Rinse. First wet your hand with the water. Then apply the soap all over. Scrub all your palms all wella. Rub over every finger, yeah. Under your nails, make you wash 'em. Front of your hands, make you scrub 'em. Back of your hands, make you rub 'em. Then you rinse 'em again. Then rinse 'em again, oh yeah. Rub 'em, scrub 'em, rinse 'em, yeah.
Great, fantastic. That was Wet On by Tana Musica. And this is the Science Show on Jambo Radio, Scotland with Dr. Dada. So this is broadcasting live from the city of Glasgow. Of course, once again, just be reminded you can listen to us on DAB and you can listen and watch us live at jamboradio.co.uk. And episodes are also uploaded to the Jambo Radio Scotland YouTube channel. So great, let's carry on our discussion. So we were having a chat with Dr. Ekwem, and he was about to start telling us a little bit more about his scientific research on epidemiology in livestock. So perhaps then, back to you, Dr. Ekwem. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about your PhD research, what you studied, and just in a language that we can understand, non-specialists?
Yeah. So in my PhD at the University of Glasgow, which was for 4 years intensive study, I'm sure yourself, you know how the rigorous of the whole PhD program is. Mm-hmm. So mine was quite interesting because I had a lot of opportunity to travel. As I said, we do a ton of international animal research. And so I had to spend a lot of time in Tanzania, in Kenya, and in Glasgow. So we it was focused on a disease on livestock, which is foot and mouth disease. So foot and mouth disease is a virus disease that is it's not zoonotic now. It only affects animals. There could be some little element of human aspect, but it's not really important. So it caused severe. Why is important is because it caused severe economic losses in animals. There was an outbreak in the UK in 2001, 2007, and you're talking about billions of pounds being lost, animals movement restrictions. So it's catastrophic. It's something which no one wants to hear about it, especially anyone involved in the livestock sector. But in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, it is endemic, which basically means it's always available. Is affect animals there all the time. There are outbreaks, and each of this time you have an outbreak, there is economic losses in terms of milk, in terms of animals being unable to be sold in the market. And these are individuals that totally depends on their animal for survival. Yeah. And that's their source of livelihood, right? So it's threatened their source of livelihood, which basically means their essence of living. So I was studying this pathogen, and I was also studying the movement of livestock, because a critical aspect on how this virus transmit in animal population, is the movement of livestock. Livestock being moved from their homestead, where they are, to their grazing, and when they move, they interact with others. And during that interaction, this virus is being spread together with other pathogens as well. So I studied those movements, those very intricate aspects of the movement. Then I also studied the virus, and then I was able to now say, where are those critical aspects where we can focus on intervention in terms of controlling this disease using the movement information, which is a critical aspect of the transmission. So we were able to establish critical areas in the country where we can restrict this movement at different times of the year or the seasons. And then we can also identify areas where we can use vaccination, because vaccines are one of the best way to control this pathogen, actually. So, but it's not easy to vaccinate every single, like East Africa, they've got a lot of animals.
Yeah.
Me and you, we come from the western part, but in like Tanzania, I think has almost the third largest livestock population. I think, Ethiopia seems to be the highest then, but Tanzania have a lot of livestock as well, and these are critical for both the economy and for the individuals, communities as well. So but it's not always easy for them to buy these kind of vaccines and vaccinate the animals.
So what kind of animals are we talking about?
We're talking about livestock. We're talking about livestock here now.
Cows?
No. We're talking about goats. We're talking about
Cattle.
sheep. We're talking about cattle. But which are the livestock, right? The ruminant livestock now. Those are the ones that have economic value. For the cats and the dogs, they are more of, a personal kind of relationship you have with them. But for these are ones that you depend on as your livelihood. They are the ruminant animal, the livestock. That's the meaning of the word livestock, basically. Animals of economic value. So basically, that's what our research has been able to establish during my PhD. So we now know these are the areas we can target for an intervention. If we focus on few areas and vaccinate them, then we can reduce the total, impact of the disease at the country level, which becomes very critical, because that means you can only invest 5% to achieve almost 90% worth of value, rather than if you just go out and vaccinate these animals without having any kind of scientific information that advise you on where you should focus your intervention. Then you spend a little bit more without achieving, you spend too much to achieve very little. So that's what the research was all about. And we have continued doing that, and we've now expanded even into Kenya as well, which is what we are doing currently as part of my research associate position at the University of Glasgow. So it's kind of building on that achievement of the PhD research,
That's great. That's fantastic. So it's almost like an optimization process, isn't it?
Yeah, you can call it that. Yeah, basically, you're saying, okay, I have only £100, for example, to apply an intervention. How do I do it when I require almost £1,000? Well, we are telling you could focus on few areas and achieve what £1,000 would have achieved if you don't have our information.
I see. So basically, when you say areas, you're talking about geographical locations.
Exactly, specific areas in the landscape. That could be a village, and maybe that village have got a lot of grazing areas. And because the village have got a lot of grazing areas, it attracts large amount of livestock into it. And because people have to come there to graze, especially during the drought, during the dry season. Or this village have got a permanent location where there is a river. That brings a lot of animals into it. So then that becomes a cardinal point you could focus your intervention in controlling the disease at the population level. But that is also the risk now, which is something we'll also talk about in the next. I'm sure you will also have that as part of your question. But because so many animals have to come to this specific location to get resources, then they transmit disease among themselves. And that's the complication aspect of the movement now, and which is a bit applicable to what happened with the COVID situation, where you have public areas, public gathering, being restricted, movement restriction at certain areas, because that's where people come together. When you come together in number, you transmit pathogens within yourself. So that's something we've been doing a lot in animals already. So we've already been doing those kind of movement restriction to say, when there's an outbreak of this disease, I'm talking about foot and mouth disease, we can restrict movement. We can say there will be no market on this day because there's an outbreak in this village.
I see.
So when we do that, then we restrict the spread, because the good thing with those type of viruses, they spread very quickly, but then they also burn out very quickly. In other words, that it's an epidemic, right? So it increases, and then it gets to a certain level where it plateaus, and then it starts coming down. So if you could restrict that movement, and then you pass that critical phase before people can start taking their animals back again to grazing and also to the market, so that kind of break the transmission cycle.
I see.
Exactly. So that's
interesting. That's really, really interesting indeed. And I'm sure some of our listeners would like to know this as well. One of the questions I had for you was, how do you carry out your science? What do you actually do? So, for example, how do you acquire the data that you use to carry out the studies, and your results? What form does it take? Would you like to share some things about that with us?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So the data collection is the most challenging part, because for every good science, it's about data. And if you don't have the right quality data, then your inferences definitely cannot be generalized, and that all becomes a problem in science. So so because of the nature of our study is empirical data, means we have to collect grassroots information. That means we need to go to the field. Yes. We need to be there. I have to travel. I have to be there in person. So, for example, like for the virus data, how we do that is we collect samples from animals. So these animals will have clinical kind of signs. They're showing, like for the foot and mouth disease virus, which is a very important one in livestock. They will be showing lesions. You can see a rupture on their mouth, so they can't actually eat when they have that disease. And then you can restrain the animals. Of course, you need to have a chat with the owner of the livestock, and then to say, this is what I want to do. Can I collect the samples? And of course, they're always willing and happy, because they know at the end of the day, your research is going to, benefit them, because then, you have the right drugs, or they have the right vaccines, which they can use to improve their livestock health. So we collect those kind of samples. Then for the livestock movement part of it, we also have to put like GPS trackers on the animal. So we train the animals, we put a collar on it, which can tell us where the animal is going and who is interacting with. So we could do that maybe, for example, in a village, we could have about 4 or 5 GPS collars that tell us tracking heads. So in real time, we can tell where this head is going, who is interacting with, and how often they're interacting, and where they are interacting. Where are those high flash points where they do too much interactions, which causes those critical areas I've been talking about. So that's another aspect we collect such movement data. And also we could also have household surveys, where we sit with housekeepers and ask them information about the history of the animal, how they move them, where they go to, who they interact with. So you can also collect this information that way. But now for the analysis, so we have different aspects of where we can analyze this kind of data. Of course, for the biological data, you do the laboratory analysis, and then you see the type of virus. You even look at the strain of the virus, or the variant, you could call it. Just like the way in COVID, where they could say, now there is a Delta strain, or there is another kind of one. There is so that's how these viruses are. The foot and mouth disease have got different strains, so we need to know which one is circulating in the animal population to inform the vaccine that we need to select or we need to use. So that's an aspect of how our result look like. We know the strain, then we say, okay, this is the type of strain that is causing it. Or it has changed from the previous one we used to know. Perhaps our vaccine is no longer going to work. So that becomes very critical, and that's an important information. Then for the movement, of course, where the movement basically tells us is to say, well, this is a time and a season where a lot of animals are meeting in this particular geographic location. And that is how you can, and this is what you can do to reduce it. For example, I can build a feedlot. I can say, this village, you don't have enough of resources. That's why you have to move to this critical location, and you're transmitting a lot of diseases across others. Perhaps if we build you a feedlot, you can stay here, and then your movement is less. So those are the kind of way we analyze the data, and then that's how it fits into policies, which we share with the government, and that helps the livestock sector development.
That's fantastic. That's really, really interesting. And it's, so many aspects to that, isn't there? So what aspect of it would you say are you most involved with? So is it like taking of the samples, or, analyzing in the laboratory, or is it that the data, bioinformatics side of things that you're more into?
So because I'm really a field epidemiologist, so if you narrow me down to my specialty, it goes down to field epidemiology.
I see.
So if there is an outbreak, I'm the guy that is going to be there to collect the sample, to collect the movement data. And I do less of the laboratory, because I can't do everything, just like that in science, you need to some level of specialty. So, but then I can send the samples to a specialist, because it has to be a specialist laboratory that will do the analysis. So they do that, and then they provide the result back to us, and then I can still analyze it and then make meaning of what is going on in the field. So I would say those are the aspects I do a little bit more than the others, but they're all interwoven, right? Because you need to still collect good samples, otherwise the lab will not be able to do a proper examination.
Of course, absolutely. So, talking about the question of the week, then, again, just as a reminder, it's displayed on the screen for those watching live. But if you're listening to us live, of course, you can phone in and chip in on this topic. The number to call is 0743 782 6865. That's 0743 782 6865. So the question for the week is, what are the societal impacts of Veterinary Epidemiology. So if you asked that question, just given 1 or 2 minutes, how would you answer that from an expert point of view?
Yeah, 1 or 2 minutes is quite small, but let me say how to bring it together.
Yes.
So in a nutshell, zoonosis is the first thing you think about, which are those pathogens that transmit from animals to humans and vice versa. Yeah. And it might surprise you to know that up to 60 to 61% of pathogens in humans actually originate, that is infectious pathogens in humans that cause disease in humans, actually emerge from animals. And that's massive. So for example, the COVID, Ebola, which me and you have experienced before in the western part of Africa, for example, these are zoonotic diseases. So they are so critical. And for the veterinary epidemiology, which basically means understanding the distribution, the pattern, the determinants, what causes them, how can you reduce them in animal population. So by doing that, you are invariably reducing them in human population. Yeah. So that's why the veterinary epidemiology is so critical to human health. If up to 60% or more than 60% of pathogens that actually affect humans are coming from the animals, then it's critical to control them from the source. When you nip it in the bud right there at the source, then the humans become free. Yes. So example, if COVID can be prevented from escaping from animals to humans, for example, they wouldn't have been having the pandemic. So that's become a very critical aspect of the social values. But then you're looking at the individual animal owners themselves. Yes. You have an animal, your animal is sick. The animal needs to get well. Whether it's an animal that costs you a lot, that gives you a lot of comfort and happiness, maybe it's your pet, or maybe it's an animal like a livestock, for example, where you derive your livelihood from. Yeah. If your cattle is sick and dies, for example, there's an outbreak of foot and mouth disease, for example, and your animals are sick, they can't produce milk, and that milk is what you need to sell to the market to get money to take care of your family and pay fees, then that becomes a big problem for the farmers, which is what people really suffer in sub-Saharan Africa, where up to 70% of the poor, the rural poor, actually depends on livelihood from agricultural resources. So it's so important, to these people. Like the Maasai, for example, which are very similar to the Fulanese we have in the western part of Africa. The Maasais are more in the eastern part of the Africa. Yeah. To them, their livestock is everything.
Indeed, yes.
Sometimes they will prefer to do things that will benefit more their livestock than even themselves. Indeed. They don't mind travel several hours to get to a point where they can give livestock, where they can feed their animals or give water to their animals that are dying of drought because of the economic value and also the attachment, the emotional and sentiment which they have to their livestock. So veterinary epidemiology basically means improving animal health generally. It's so critical to both the livestock keepers and also to you as a human.
Fantastic. So if you could summarize then, there are economic impacts. Of course. There are public health impacts as well, isn't there?
Exactly.
So that's really great. It's really worth taxpayers' money.
Of course. Paying a salary.
So just a few key facts from the World Health Organization about zoonosis. So it says a zoonosis is any disease or infection that's naturally transmissible from vertebrate animals to humans. There are over 200 known types of zoonosis. We've mentioned a couple of them. Yeah. Zoonosis comprise a large percentage of new and existing diseases in humans, as the doctor has said. Yeah. Some zoonoses, such as rabies, are 100% preventable through vaccination and other methods.
True.
So just a few facts there on zoonosis from the World Health Organization. So, just really quickly, do you have any hobbies, any things you like to do when you're not working?
Well, when I'm relaxing, with family, of course, that's one of the best way to relax.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but hobbies as well. Yeah, I do watch a lot of movies. Football, I'm quite passionate with. Just catching up on soccer and see what's going on worldwide. And now the World Cup is coming up, so that's a lot with hobbies.
That'll be
someone
fun.
That loves football. So I spend a lot of time watching football movies and just chatting with friends, typical African way.
Nice, very nice. Yeah. So do you have family here then?
Yeah, I do actually,
Oh, that's great, fantastic. Oh, nice. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cool down with some instrumental music that I made. And of course, you can be sure there was a lot of science and technology involved in the making of this track. In fact, I think we might devote a show to the science and technology of music production, but not today. This is the Science Show with Dr Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland, broadcasting live from the city of Glasgow. Again, you can listen and catch us live at jamboradio.co.uk, and you can watch our past episodes on our YouTube channel, Jambo Radio Scotland. So, fantastic. Great. So we've had a really good time today talking with Dr. Ekwem about veterinary epidemiology and the societal impact it has. And now we're just going to conclude with a couple of fun activities. So first, we're going to enjoy a few science jokes. So we'll be looking forward to that. So perhaps we can ask Dr. Ekwem, first of all, since you're the one actively working in the field. I find scientists usually have jokes that are kind of related to their field that maybe they've heard before, maybe they've come up with themselves. So we're just wondering, do you have any jokes that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, actually, mine is not a typical joke, but it's just something very funny.
Yeah.
So I was talking about putting GPS collars on animals to track them, to know where they go, right? So we went into this household, and the farmer, it was in Maasai, in Tanzania, just very close to the border with Kenya. And so I told him, explained to him while we were here that we want to put this collar on your animal, and so that this animal, we can know where it goes and who you interact with. And then you're like, okay, whoa, you're going to put that. If you put it on one animal, these others are going to be jealous. So are you going to put for every animal? Because then, I don't want any crisis in my livestock. He's got about 500 cattle.
Wow.
So that's a massive one. And then I was like, okay, no, we can only put one or two. We can't put 500. Come on. And then he was like, okay, you can put it there on that bull. And then I look at the bull, I'm like, no, this is not going to last 1 minute on the bull, because the bulls are very aggressive.
I see.
If you put it on a bull, it's just going to go to a big tree and just
rub it
off. I said, no, I need a docile cow that is so friendly and quiet.
Yeah.
So that was quite funny.
That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that aspect of your work with us. It's quite, there are so many nice stories I can imagine from all your travels. It's a very, very nice, adventurous life, isn't it?
It is actually,
So if I can just ask, so the collars that you put on, are they really expensive?
Oh yeah, they are actually, because they capture this movement in real time.
I see.
And it's not been tried in human health actually, but of course there are a lot of in humans you don't have to wear them. You could just use your phone and track, just like what the Chinese were doing to say this is where people are going and this is who you have contact with, you know, and then something like that. But because we don't have those kind of facilities in animals health, we have to get companies to develop these gadgets. They are quite expensive and difficult to quite an expensive bit of research to do, but quite interesting.
I see. And how many of them do you typically have, like say for one of your papers? So how many of those devices would you install typically?
Well, it depends on the study. Like when we look at interactions, means we want to know how quickly you mix with people and how quickly virus spread across communities in livestock. We could use 50, but that's just in like a small, a small area, maybe say about 11,000 kilometers square area, not very large, not in the entire country, for example. So and that 50 is quite expensive because it's not easy to maintain them. You need to maintain the devices, and you can't keep them on for up to a year. So it's not just putting them on; you have to maintain them. You need to look after them, and normally it's study duration for about 2 years. So that's quite expensive bit of research to do, but it's very high quality data because it's real-time tracking.
Nice, fantastic. And do the device communicate directly with satellites?
You can. You can use those that qualify, but also you could use cheaper ones that you have to go physically and download the data. So those ones are also available.
I see.
So you could have an option of doing both as well.
It's really, really interesting, actually. Really, really fun.
Please.
Great. So we're talking about jokes, but now we're talking science. Well, anyway, this is the Science Show, Dr. Dada. And, okay, so I have a couple of jokes here. They're terrible jokes, okay, as are all science jokes. Okay, so the first one says, we don't think veterinarians should be called doctors at all. This is trying to make, look for trouble now. So why do you think that's the case? What do you think the answer is? we don't think veterinarians should be called doctors at all. Doctors seem like a more apt description, don't you think?
Well,
so instead of doctors, doctors.
Yeah, well, it's a joke. But
It's
anyway,
a bad joke.
yeah. Well, when the term a doctor, for example, if it's not the academic aspect, if it's the medical, there are specific kind of training you undergo to be a doctor. You know, and the veterinary doctors undergo that training. We spend 6 years for example, in Africa, we spent 6 years in the university, and I've explained, originally when I come on board on air, I was explaining to you basically the training path, the training path.
No, don't worry about this.
This of course, no. I've heard these jokes a lot. That's why I'm trying to explain it now. I've heard it a lot because people used to make fun of me as well.
I think the misconception comes from the fact that people maybe place less value on animal life than human life. So they say, but it's not really that way.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely.
Anyway, so I've got another one. It says, have you heard about the special promo at the vet store? Buy one, get one free.
Okay.
So I'm sure you got that one.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another one. How do vets get paid?
Oh, okay.
By the pound. So playing on the fact that for the pound is where dogs, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Animals get paid.
Okay.
And by the pound. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, this one. How much money does a vet student have?
Okay. Well, I have been one, and well. We can actually make a little bit bucks than others. Because
it says 1 cent.
1 cent.
But the cent is spelled SCENT. So 1 cent. So that was something I forgot to ask as well. Okay. So like doing all this work with animals, do you find it's a bit of maybe a messy thing sometimes?
Well, like for me exactly. Like I deal with the dirty part, basically in the field. But then when you come back to do the lab stuff or the data analysis, especially for us that are into the science part of it, or if you are a clinician, a veterinary clinic's as clean as a human hospital, so it's also, it's a level of professionalism, of course, you do same,
good,
it's clean.
That's fantastic. Great. So what we're gonna do now? So that's fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Well, to conclude, we're going to play a track that we actually started on the last episode of the show, and it's entitled Mafuriko. And after that, we'll conclude the show. So let's just listen to that real quickly. Fantastic. So hopefully that spiced up your afternoon a little bit, as well as we like to do on this show. We like to spice things up with music. So that brings us to a close on this week's edition of The Science Show with Dr. Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland. And remember, if you'd like to keep your eye on the developments in science, in the world of technology, and of course, as you know, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Well, if that's something that you're interested in, well, this is the place to be. Here we're going to look at the impact of the scientific development on everyday life. And if you just like to learn one or two things about a specific science subject or science related activity going on in Scotland and in Glasgow, well, this again is the place to be. If you have any questions on today's show or on any other episodes of the show, please feel free to email us at info@jamboradio.co.uk, and please do check our webpage on jamboradioscotland.co.uk/The Science Show. And there you can find news and updates about this show. So once again, we'd like to thank Dr. Ekwem for being here with us today and shedding light on the topic for today. And we'd like to thank you for listening to this week's edition of The Science Show with Dr. Dada on Jambo Radio Scotland. I am Dr. Dada presenting, and of course in the studio also we have Serena with us producing the show as the visual producer and audio producer today. And next week we hope to have another guest on the show. So tune in to us same time next week for another bumper edition of The Science Show with Dr. Dada on Jambo Radio. So to play us out of the show today, we're going to listen to a track by Asha, and it's a beautiful one of my favorite tracks. And until next week, we'll say stay curious.